Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight for this Artist Voices in Conversation event. My name is Michelle. For those who don't know me, I'm the curator and program manager at A Space Arts, and we're an arts organisation based in Southampton. I'm a white woman in my early 30s with a bob and a red and black jumper on, and I've got a big painting of a cow behind me. I'm sitting at home. I came home from home early so that I could do this chat in my comfy clothes. So I hope you are also all comfy and ready for our conversation. This event is being recorded, just to let you all know. So if you don't want to be on camera, just keep your videos switched off. We're recording it because we're going to upload it to our YouTube channel next week, so that other people can access the conversation, and that it will sit on our YouTube channel as a resource for people who want to come back and listen to the conversation again. Yes, so A Space Arts is, as I said, a visual arts organisation based in Southampton. We have multiple venues and projects. We run studio spaces in the city called the Arches. We run a Ripe graduate programme to support artists coming out of Solent Uni and Winchester School of Art. We run a host of artist development activities, but our kind of flagship venue is a medieval monument called God's House Tower. And it is in God's House Tower where we've got an exhibition on at the moment that we're here to talk about tonight. So God's House Tower, as I said, is a medieval monument. It's a beautiful building with these kind of exposed brick walls. And we have a couple of gallery spaces. We have a museum part of the building. There's a cafe and bar downstairs and all of that kind of those facilities. And we host quite a lot of we host a lot in the venue. It's sort of a really multi-use space. We have exhibitions, but we also have lots of sort of regular events and community groups that come and meet in our building quite often, as well as kind of private hires and weddings and things. So yeah, it's a building with a very rich history and a very rich program of exhibitions and activities, which are going on kind of all the time. So if you haven't been to visit us, come down to Southampton and come and see us. You have 2 weekends left of the amazing exhibition, which we're going to be talking about tonight. Our coffers were empty to pay for your pleasures by Josie Turnbull. And it is, as you'll see in a minute, we're going to share some images of the exhibition to give you an idea of what it looks like. But it really doesn't do it justice. So do come and see it in person if you can. So the conversation tonight is called Artist Voices, and it's a part of a kind of broader programme that we've been running for a few years now. It's a series of panel discussions and conversations that support artist development by unpacking and demystifying key topics and issues of the visual arts ecology through discussion with artists and cultural workers. So as much as we're here tonight to find out more about Josie's exhibition and our guest speaker, Oka, who's with us tonight, we're going to find out a bit about her work as well. But we'd also like to kind of bring the conversation back to thinking about, working in the visual arts, making work in the visual arts, and kind of the ways in which both Josie and Oka are exploring ideas through a certain type of practice and imagery and fiction, and particularly fables. But we'll come on to that in a moment. I'm going to share some images. My colleague James is on the call, and he's going to help us tonight with some kind of admin bits. James is doing a wave. James, could you share the slideshow? And I'm going to just read the exhibition text out so that we have, some context before we start the talk. So, commissioned by A Space Arts, Our Coffers Were Emptied to Pay for Your Pleasures by Josie Turnbull is an installation exploring cycles of desirability, extraction, and obsolescence through the factual fable of the Asian arowana, a critically endangered fish turned luxury commodity. Artificial scarcity and selective breeding practices have transformed the fish into a status symbol. And despite a waning market, a multi-million-pound arowana trade persists through networks of breeders, collectors, international championships, and groomers who perform cosmetic surgeries on the fish. This installation at God's House Tower visualises the imagined fate of an anthropomorphized Arowana, it's not a very easy word for me to say, a former champion cast aside. Artifacts, including costumes, trophies, and merchandise, build a memoir dramatising the Arawana's tragic rise and fall. These individual works repurpose false nails, broken toys, and fast fashion garments, the detritus of overproduction. The work traces a lineage of British colonial extractive industries in Malaysia, the Golden Arawana's place of origin, and draws parallels with the ruthless star-making machine of Golden Age Hollywood, as evoked in films like Sunset Boulevard and Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. By framing the Arowana trade as a contemporary tale of overreach, exploitation, and spectacle, Our Coffers Were Emptied to Pay for Your Pleasures reflects a familiar matrix of frictions: global trade, conspicuous consumption, and ecological and moral decay. So there's a couple more images, James. Perhaps we can kind of share some from. So the images that we're looking at the moment are of the installation, which is in the main gallery at God's House Tower. And then underneath the main gallery is this kind of, upstairs is kind of bright and airy. And then downstairs is this kind of fish tank-like room, which is convenient for these collages that Josie's made that are kind of in light boxes and installed in various places in the space. And Josie's going to talk a little bit more about both installations a bit later on. Okay, so I'm going to now introduce Khairani Barokka, who's a writer and artist from Jakarta, based in London. She's written a new text in response to Josie's exhibition, a critical writing text, which was commissioned by us alongside the exhibition. I think it was sent to you before the event, so hopefully everyone's had a read through that. If not, I'm going to post it in the chat in a minute, and we'll send it after the conversation too, so you can read that if you haven't already. We'll talk a bit more about that text and the kind of the overlaps between Josie and Okka's practice as part of the discussion. But before we get into that, I'm going to hand over to Okka to introduce herself. Over to you.
Hi, thank you so much, Mia. Huge congratulations to Josie Ray and to Mia and to A Space Arts on a gorgeous, tactile, scrumptious, luminous, viscous exhibition. It's fluid and dynamic and creates bubbles in the heart. I'm here to talk about just one of my art and writing projects, which has turned into this book, which took 14 years. It's called Anna Infinite. And a book is not just a book. So thank you. Yes, Josie was there to celebrate at the launch last night. And I can't wait to talk to her about all the ways, sometimes you meet someone, you're like, oh my gosh, yes, 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 yes. We're working on similar themes and provocations from different angles. Um, and also, of course, a love of the color pink and the color lilac. Um, this is the book. Next slide, please, James. So a book is not just a book, and by that I mean, so the tagline for my practice is disability justice as anti-colonial praxis, environmental justice, and access as translation. So when you think about access as translation, I'm a disabled person, and also for self-description, as we always do in disabled circles, I'm an Indonesian woman. I'm 40. I'm wearing a blue shirt, a necklace, and my hair is tied back, and behind me is a pink background. So, the Anna Infinite project began in 2011 when I became even more physically disabled, and at the same time, I discovered a very famous painting by Paul Gauguin called Anna la Javanaise. I'm not going to show the original painting because I find it to be a scab, but every image that I show here is part of how I iterated and iterated and iterated and iterated on this painting because I'm a Javanese person and I was like, what was this Javanese person doing in Paris and why aren't they allowed to define themselves and why do we assume that people in archives are cisgender and heteronormative and and pliable and enslavable and commodifiable and then turn them into multi-million pound paintings, some resonances already with the Arowana trade, which also involves Southeast Asian fish. And so, yes, so what you see now is I'm just going to show some stills from the body of work that I created, some of which this in particular is from a performance installation called Ana Nomenclature, which was at the ICA. So it had two projections. One was on the floor, and that floor projection was static, and I performed from within the white outline of that. And then on the wall was projected basically a short film I did that showcased a bunch of digital collages, such as the one you see where an alien purple hand is trying to erase the figure of Anna's. Next slide, please. Thank you. So that's that image closer up. It has Javanese writing across their eyes. And yes, the painting also very famously has a monkey at their feet. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is the image that was projected on the floor, and I performed within that. And if you see on the next slide, there's that's sort of a photo of how it operated. So I was performing from within the confines of that white outline, which also sort of also evokes, the chalk outline of bodies during a crime scene. But I'm also reinscribing that outline on the floor of a Western gallery. So there's like multiple levels of the outline's meaning. And if you go to the next slide, please. So and a big part of my practice is also discussion, is also engagement, is also poetry and fiction, and presenting that in ways that are audio, in ways that are audible, in ways that are not audible, playing with different senses. So it's a time-based translation, and this book and the 14-year-long project is all a translation of a single image. So everything is a caption for this image. So if you think about alt text, that I hope we're all doing with, with social media, like this is my alt text, a ginormous version of alt text. And it was so brilliant to come across Josie's work because they're asking really trenchant questions about a multi-million pound trade that people should know more about. And people should also be more conscious of the ways in which Southeast Asian uh, biomes and peoples are being commodified in many other ways, such as with Annas all around us. So next slide, please. Here's another digital collage, and I mean, when you think about an image, it's obviously not just the painting. Now it's also .gif, .jpeg. It's Google image searchable with AI. There's all kinds of data scraping, and so the identity of a person becomes scattered across many pixels. And I think there's one slide. Is there one slide more, or is that it? I think yes. And so I just created many illustrations, and here's an image of, multiple potential Annas, multiple black and brown girls, sort of looking upon Western observers of the painting in a dream in also a gallery. And I think that is the last slide. Yeah, okay. Thank you. And I'm looking forward to discussing with Josie their absolutely brilliant work.
Thanks, Oka. Thank you for sharing those images as well. Um, I'm going to hand over to Josie now, and Josie's going to introduce herself and then kick off the conversation. But just before I do, I was just going to say if anybody has any questions, please do post them in the chat as we go. We're going to take some breaks during the discussion, so if there are kind of questions that are coming up, we can kind of do them. We can kind of have them as we go. If not, we will also have a bit at the end for a Q&A. So if you've got anything burning, pop it in there. If not, feel free to save it to the end as well. And I'm going to hand over to Josie. Over to you.
Hello, I'm Josie. I am a white woman in her 30s with huge gold glasses, short blonde feathers, and a gold velvet dress and a baby chicken foot necklace. Thank you all for joining. And if you're joining in the future from YouTube, thank you for joining in the future as well. Thanks first to Mia and James and A-Space Keely for commissioning this whole project, for wrangling and doing a 4-day changing rooms install in the castle, and for all the kind of collaborators, friends and family who kind of made this project with me. They're listed and credited in the exhibition text, and they all have brilliant personal practices. So Google them all. And thank you to Oka as well, who is the best artistic Tinder match I could have dreamed for. I was at the book launch last night, and I'm very excited to read it. I was very daunted after I Googled her. She is unbelievably distinguished, accomplished, and excitable in the best way. And for the critical text, she had the patience to peruse 33 pages of research notes, or 12,000 words of research notes. I don't know how many she looked at, but she had the patience to open it. She wrote the critical commission for the show in the first person perspective of a grand dame, Arowana, and she says herself in it as the fish that she has unimpeachable fabulousness, as is painfully obvious, which is really about her. So I am from and living in London. I did a mostly COVID lockdown master's in fine art and science at Central St. Martin's and finished that in 2022. Before that, I was living for 5 years in Ho Chi Minh City. And after I graduated, I was on a study semester in Yogyakarta. It was unrelated to this project, but it's where I first found out about the Arowana, who has been my monomania ever since. I found out about her because I was searching like national animals, because I found out that Indonesia, each province has a faunal emblem, an animal emblem for each province, and the Arowana is the national animal of charm for Indonesia. And then so I started Googling this national animal of charm, and she is really charming. She's really, really charming. I also found out, as a quick aside, that West Sulawesi, a province's animal emblem, is a bird whose English name is snoring rail, which I've never heard of, and I don't know how it got that name, but that will probably be something to Google after. But yeah, the more I Googled, the just more, as Oka very aptly put it last night, the more Tiger King it became. The Arowana trade, like while I was starting the project, was worth $200 million, like globally in 2022. Like they, at the time of the height of the market, an Arowana could sell for like tens of thousands, and very, very rare ones can sell for up to like hundreds of thousands. I last year met the most expensive Arowana in the world, and she is worth between £700,000 and £1.2 million. She's a 5-time winner of Miss Unique Beauty, and she's in a top secret location that I will not disclose. So I found it really interesting that you could have a mass-produced endangered species, due to them becoming this kind of luxury, lively commodity. They became extinct in the wild, nearly extinct in the wild, in Indonesia and in Malaysia. And instead, they became mass-produced in breeding farms, and commodified that way. And because of then illegal poaching and trade, the wild Arowanas were pushed further towards extinction, but the trade in them just exploded. So because they were declared critically endangered, you now can only sell and trade captive bred Arowanas. So each fish gets a microchip and a certificate of authenticity to prove that they are not poached and not captively, and that they're captively raised rather than from the wild. They're also, as well as being kind of like a living Ferrari, they're seen as like or some people view them as a talisman or something that invites fortune and wealth. They embody luck and prosperity, but they also bring that to the owner. So they're also known as the dragonfish, because they've got these mustache whiskers, these barbels, which look like dragons' mustaches, and these huge coin-like scales. When I got further into the Googling about all the murders and the high-profile thefts and the revenge that wives have taken on cheating husbands by frying their pet Arowana live on TikTok, I was also interested in the fact that they are subject to these practices known as grooming, which is tanning regimes. So champion ones will have sunbeds attached to their tanks in order to enhance their coloration and therefore like enhance their value by basically sunburning them or just deepening the coloration that they would be in the wild. So to create this absolute fake, something that is more hyperreal than the real thing. The cosmetic surgeries include eyelid reductions, chin shaving for double chins and for underbite correction, and fin and tail surgeries to splice between the fins and then separate them so that they'll grow back kind of wider and longer. So I found that very interesting for thinking how a cosmetic gaze and an Instagram face or a Kardashian changing beauty ideal could also be projected onto a fish. So I received Arts Council funding for some reason at the end of 2023 to do a research trip and go to Malaysia, particularly concentrating in Perak, but go to Malaysia and Singapore to go to different championships, meet the different plastic surgeons, meet breeders, visit the farms, and kind of trace where the industry is now after kind of the boom of former years and now its decline, and see how the Arowana industry relates to previous eras of colonial era, like extractive industries in Malaysia under British colonial rule, which were tin and rubber and opium and tea. So that was my fish business. And so I ended up being able to use that research to make this show at GHT, which was such a great place to be able to showcase. I'd always imagined my Arowana as living in a crumbling castle with stairs that she'd fall down when she was drunk, and that was exactly what I was able to realize, and found it really interesting developing this work related to Southampton specifically and JHT specifically. Southampton being a huge like imperial maritime port, so how that relationship works with the Dutch East Indies and with Malaysia and Singapore in times of yore. And also the fact that it's had all these cycles of boom and bust. Southampton was this kind of city for the nouveau riche to visit and to take the air, and a place of like prosperity and spa towns where Navy admirals would have their houses, and then at the same time GHT, God's House Tower, was a prison, a debtor's prison. And so these cycles of glory, obsolescence, like control, extracting labor, and boredom as well, of imagining the site, this fish trapped forevermore in her castle, and similarly how that works in the context of being in a form of prison. This I will segue into my first question to Oka. So, thinking about morgues and prisons, in your collection Ultimatum Orangutan, which isn't the latest book that was launched yesterday, but it's an excellent collection from 2021.
Yeah.
There is a poem called Europa, and which I think is kind of talking about your experience in maybe specifically the Natural History Museum, or quite a few of the poems speak about the experience of
I think that one
being in
was,
museums here.
yeah, it was a reference to, so Eropa is Europe in Indonesian. It's the word for Europe. I think that one was also more generally about viewing Europe from a
Yeah.
global majority perspective in European history, in terms of the sheer brutality of what was done. But yeah,
And then in that poem is the beautiful phrase plunder mausoleumed, which I was just like, oh, that's a that's just I really liked that phrase. The full line was, "Here is plunder mausoleumed, an oily balm of percussive pride in history books thrown by whiteout." And so I wanted to, yeah, say, can you speak more like about whether you think the museum is a mausoleum of artifacts, of cultural artifacts, of flora, of fauna, or is it also about that as plunder, those objects or that fauna and flora being killed, being entombed by their placement in kind of those settings? And I guess that does relate to the painting and Le Javanese.
absolutely. That's a brilliant question. Thank you. One thing I also forgot to mention is that when Mia and Josie approached me about contributing a small piece to Josie's project, I said, "Oh, I'm about to launch a book where there's a chapter in which I write from the point of view of a fish, an Indonesian fish." And I was like, "Huh?" What? It's again artistic Tinder match. And I'm just going to read uh to get it right. So my cultures are Minangkabau, which is West Sumatra, largest matrilineal society in the world, and Javanese. And in Minang culture, my clan is Chaniago. And of Chaniago people from the specific region, we're from Tanah Datar region, it is said Ayanyo Jania, Kanyo Jina, Buminyo Dingin, which means clear water, tame fish, cool land. And tame fish here is not like fish that are conquered, but more that fish that are gentle. Like the word gentle shows up a lot when I think about folklore in my cultures. Um, and I think the key part about how this framing of my clan frames fish in it is that the fish are free and equal to us, on those lands. Whereas, yes, fish, obviously, arowanas that are being made to look like Kim Kardashian are not necessarily liberated, and neither are images of children painted by abusive white men in museums that are now that are images of plunder that are kept hidden away, and certainly I think. So I'm also a cultural archives consultant. So like what's happening is that more and more archives around Europe and the UK are discovering, or sometimes they need to have somebody ask like, "Hey, do you have any archives from Southeast Asia?" And they'll be like, "I don't think so." And then like, "Oh yeah," like there's just so much plunder, they can't keep track of it. And literally like part of what I'm doing this week is like, oh, we discovered some new archival footage or like something archival related to Indonesia. Like, what do we do with this? Like, what is the colonial context of this? And what I always try to do is be like, these are not dead things. They belong to communities, and communities are alive, right? And so I'm trying to, and not in a zombified way, but in an actual like acknowledge the role of cultural artifacts in living communities kind of thing, like because another lie is that indigenous communities have all died out, or or that are stagnant or have been colonized to oblivion and don't have any identity and don't have anything. It's like, no, these are actual communities, and it's very difficult for people from those communities to gain access to these museums that are meant to be mausoleums. I think that the colonial project of museums is you take things and they're dead, and you just keep them dead, 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 dead. And as a lover of horror, I think it's like, no, they're alive. They're actually alive. And the role of, I think, especially like global majority cultural workers is to say like they're very much alive to us. These cultures are alive, and actually they need to be actively part of the public, and we need to be the ones to decide where they are, because it's very difficult to gain access to European archives. Like there are people crowdfunding, and I know, cultural scholars and artists who crowdfund to try and get them to even access, European archives. And as you know, like a lot of these like rarefied spaces where there are paintings of brown children who may or may not be from Java, are very difficult to access, even to people who work in cultural industries. And then you have visas, and then you have English proficiency, and you have like the hostile environment. You have like so many barriers, because I think museums are meant to keep these, human remains, even, like, and animal remains, and, taxidermied animals, away from where their original place. And I thought of that Minang phrase when I was thinking about your work, because I'm like, oh, when I was writing as one of your Arawanas, I was thinking like they must be so homesick, and like how huge are the distances between the indigenous communities that they came from and like where they will all end up. So I think that plunder mausoleum, it's mausoleum as a verb, is like to be made a mausoleum, but actually like there are active ways of reawakening the aliveness in cultural institutions, and to open it up for like repatriation, reparations, and general like resistance, rebellion, cultural activity related to living things. Thank you for listening. That was a very long-winded answer.
I wanted to say I found out a word today that I don't know if you already knew. Plunderbund, which is like, apparently a US word, so probably plunderbund. Plunderbund, referring to a corrupt alliance of corporate and financial interests. But I just think that maybe we should turn plunderbund into something else. It's a really good word.
Yeah, it's very generous. And I want to ask you in turn, well,
Mhm.
how do you see that? Like, why did plunder mausoleum resonate with you? How do you see that term relating to, our coffers were emptied?
Yeah, we don't need to do the title. So I think it does kind of relate to the title though. So that title, Our Coffers Were Emptied to Pay for Your Pleasures, is taken from an anonymous hate letter to Marie Antoinette written by a furious anonymous person. But it reminded me of, there's a book that I was using a lot during my research for this, which is called Dragon Behind the Glass, which by Emily Voigt, and it's like an extended piece of journalism about the Arowana industry. And in it, there is a line that says, they did not care if the rivers were emptied of fish, as long as their own tanks were filled with the shimmering promise of wealth. So yeah, that idea of extinction through plunder, leaving natural habitats as mausoleums, and that these kind of extinction events grow out of colonial extractive industries, like quite clearly as a legacy. And I also thought that it related to, I was looking, when I was kind of researching kind of Malaysian independence and Singaporean independence, for how kind of the British colonial project got dismantled, found out about, do you know about Operation Legacy?
I have
which
a
is
very I have not the best memory for operation names.
Operation Legacy. So in the 50s, as lots of different British colonized countries were having revolutions and gaining independence, colonial officers would just do bonfires of documents, or they would
Oh
put,
yes,
yeah, or
yes.
they'd put
Yeah.
documents in coffers in treasure chests filled with concrete and dumped into the ocean. And that was called Operation Legacy. And it was obviously an attempt to control how the British Empire could be seen by future generations and save the government from embarrassment. So I was like, that is damn plunder mausoleum if ever I heard it. So yeah, that was how those were kind of two things that kind of made that phrase, or three things, or four things.
And using a body of water as a mausoleum, which is also very interesting because obviously, like Indonesia was under slavery under the Dutch for 200 years, so the ocean and waterways are also like graves, right? And obviously, with the transatlantic slave trade, also, the ocean is graves. Um, but also, that doesn't mean that the people in them are dead, to us, right? Or that the animals in them are dead, or that the archives that were mausoleumed in the ocean are dead. So yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah. Um,
Yeah, should we segue into our next?
sure.
So at your book launch last night, which was I was blushing with pride. It was so lovely. It was really great. Everyone buy it, read it. But you spoke about the research process because you've been working on this project for 14 years. And you described kind of wrangling all the research as being like that meme of a furious man in front of like one of those CSI pin boards where all the perpetrators and the evidence are connected by red string, and it being that kind of forensic process. How on God's green earth can you do that with 14 years worth of research material? One, like physically wrangle that. And then with a project like Anna Infinite, how do you decide or know when it's done? Is it the jump scare of a publisher deadline?
Ah,
Or is it like, do you now feel like it is done now that the book
yeah.
is that you can
I
lay her?
feel like it's done but alive, which is I don't know if you feel like that about your show. And what I didn't explain very well at all earlier is that it is very much a project about disability and the visuality of disability and how I was disbelieved for many years and unmedicated for many years and I couldn't understand why. And I was like, is it race? And it is race. Spoiler alert. And and Southeast Asian women in the way that we're sexualized and infantilized at the same time. Southeast Asian people in general are then presumed to be objects of pleasure and therefore not of pain, and therefore cannot be in pain, and therefore disbelieved in emergency rooms in hospitals. So this is like the consequences of archives and art are very immediate and have real world impacts on people, right? So this is the connection between all the Annas where these are escape stories. I write lots of escape stories for them and they help me escape because yeah, it brought me to eventually, very, very gradually, like more and more people who believed me and medication and a crip community and the ability to rest. Um, I it was a torturous process, Josie. It was, I don't know how it was just a lot of like people also not necessarily being gentle with the project and then allies coming in and being like, okay, we can help you out because this person is not handling this project with care or sensitivity, right? It's a lot of that. It's a lot of iteration of community and safety and like friendship, genuinely. Um, I had a remarkable editor who you may have met last night, Albaziker Bailey, who said to me, like, the thing is, I would always think I was done, but I was so far from done. Like, I thought I was done with the project when I finished my PhD project, which was this project on an infinite. And I was literally 5 years away from being done at that
Oh,
time.
good.
Like I didn't know it, but it's also because things needed to happen in life, that realizations about, personal realizations about my family and why we hide disability because of as a consequence of Western imperialism and imperial violence and the need to keep people safe in a way that, like not that where disclosure is dangerous and all of these things. Um, but Alba Ziegler Bailey and many, you know, other people around me who were simply just like, oh, it's okay with her art project. It's just gonna keep, don't worry, like take as much time as you need. But Alba said, there chapters 2, 5, and 8, that's not your real voice. You're writing scared. And I would like you to rewrite those in your actual voice. And I was like, how dare you be so accurate about my cowardice in those chapters? And it takes, there's a difference between criticism from, whether an editor, a curator, any kind of collaborator, a gallerist. There's difference between criticism that is like, I'm being mean-spirited because I don't actually care about this project, and criticism that is like, hey, here's tough love because I care so much about this project. You know what I mean? And I was like, oh, I really recognized it as like that kind of note. So I was like, God damn it, I have to rewrite these like huge chunks of pages. And when you think about editing, you usually think about making things shorter, but actually the book is now 150 pages longer because Alba and Saba Ahmed, who's another brilliant editor who worked with me, like gave me the space to be like, this is like you're talking about trauma and other people's trauma, and you're also trying to approach some things in a lighthearted way, but it's like really tough stuff. So like be gentle with yourself, take the time you need, but you need to be able to write these chapters from a place of not being scared of what other people think or like how other people are going to view your trauma. And so it involved a lot of playing video games to make my mind calm so that I could rewrite and that I could redo and I could re-edit and rethink the art. So it's non-linear. And as somebody who's neurodivergent, we talked about this, like neurodivergence, like um in the neurodivergent sisterhood, things are non-linear. Trauma makes your mind remember things non-linearly, but also like linearity is such a colonial Western timescale thing. Um, and it's just, who knows why anything happens, right? Nobody goes out at the beginning of a project and it's like it will go A, B, C, and by the end of C, it has happened exactly as they planned. So what about you? Because I, I was telling someone this morning when you sent your research notes to me, originally I was like, oh, could you send like, 5 to 10 pages of research? You sent me 33 pages and you wrote sorry in all caps. And I, as the title of like the file that you sent me, just like, sorry. Oh. And I was so grateful that you sent all of it because I was like, this is fascinating. This is like book worthy, documentary film worthy work. This is like Tiger King who, Victoria Beckham wishes she was this Arowana, like just complete fascination with the depth of research that you undertook to do this. And I wanted to ask you, like, how did you navigate process, especially being in Southeast Asia, where things do not always go according to plan and things are often messy? Um, and if I may, a second question is like, what surprised you the most about the process?
So I was very daunted before the research trip because I was just like, I don't know how to actually like practically itinerize this. Like how, like what on, like how. And I had Pacien, who is an artist and producer in Malaysia, and she made me an airtight itinerary that made just so much sense. And it was like all the breeding farms clustered together, and then when there was a competition, and then when there was another competition in Singapore, she made me an airtight itinerary. It would have been so inefficient without her. But I was also worried because I have such a bad memory, such a shit memory. Again, neurodivergent brain. I only seem to remember things or places related to if something happened with an animal there. So if I'm like, oh, that's where that's where we saw the dog that looked like a wardrobe. Okay, yeah. Or like that's where that really big beetle that fell on my head. So I think before the research trip, because of just kind of reading material, I hadn't actually ingested or retained anything about the lake that the Arowana are from, or kind of the different provinces where the gutta percha rubber industry was, opium, tin. I just couldn't wrangle it. But then obviously you go somewhere and then you can meet an animal in each of those places. So it's like, oh, that's where the horse tried to get into the taxi. And then writing things up, it wouldn't be like, okay, that is where in 1952, it'd be like, yeah, that's okay. That's where the horse climbed into the taxi. Oh, that's where I got to feed a capybara. So I wouldn't say it's deep research. It's just making sure that you meet a specific animal at every site. But I think probably in general, in my process, I've deemed or decided on the phrase factual fable as like a framework, to kind of accommodate that as a way that an animal protagonist and the fabulous genre can satirize and reveal irrationalities, transgressions, behavioral failings, but also on a systemic scale, like scaled up, that a fable, a non-human protagonist can subvert like whole social orders, like an Animal Farm, obviously. And within a fable, kind of the most important thing is the idea of animism, or actors with agency. So that everything is an acting or has agency. Inanimate, animate, object, flora, fauna. So rather than me trying to retain a lot of or ingest a lot of kind of historical information or kind of record keepings about kind of brackish water pHs and stuff that I would not be able to retain. I think wrangling that through having an animal protagonist is how I like ingest and remember information. So yeah, if you can't remember something, just put a fish in.
It's almost like they're your emotional support animals.
They are my emotional support animals.
But it's anyway, and I love that you use so what was something that surprised you the most?
What surprised me the most was that everybody had something to say about the Arowana. So what was really great was, while I was on the research trip for like 8 weeks, anytime someone would ask me, so like, what are you doing? And it'd be like, so there's this fish. But that it was like a cipher and an icebreaker for so many interesting conversations with anyone I met, like taxi driver, like grandmas who were running laundrettes, people running hostels, like everyone had like an opinion about Arowana and the Arowana industry. And through that revealed kind of other concerns and feelings about like ecotourism and different eras of like extractive industry, like the palm plantations, like the homogeny of that. And it became then about like wealth disparity as well. And then also taxi drivers who had their own pet arowanas who would just like want to tell me about the arowanas' favorite snacks. So I was surprised that it was just such a it was a way. There was not a person I met who was like, cool. Everyone had something to say about the fish. So that was also a really nice way of learning more and remembering more, is like, yeah, through that conversation rather than kind of trying to read
Absolutely. And I
about
think,
levels.
yeah, and I think it's like feeling through facts, and emotions are facts, right? You know, like feeling through research emotionally is like a big part also, I feel like, of neurodivergency. And I think that it, again, artistic Tinder match, you use fabulous fables. I call this speculative nonfiction because reading all these art historical books that are supposedly fact about Gauguin, like every single detail of his biography had to be the same, but then you write about the subjects of these paintings, and like Anna Javanese has been described as like half Indian, half Malay, half Javanese, half Dutch, Sinhalese, mulatto, like a million different ethnicities, and I'm like, oh, y'all are just making this up. You don't know. So actually this is not fact. This is already fiction. So I'm not actually doing anything new. I'm just creating short stories about these potential people who could have escaped from Gauguin. And it's a kinder fiction, I hope, than the kind that you are doing. And it was also scary how interchangeable we were as brown people, you know, which is something, you know, like, oh, where are you from? Mexico, Argentina, China, you know, in the same way that I think a lot of our animal kind are also made interchangeable in the global trade when there are specificities to like their context in among the local community. Um, so I will now, if I may, transition to speaking about, oh, I love, I've been so looking forward to asking you about this question because you had such great answers when we talked it over earlier. The materiality of your work. I am someone who's really rubbish with working with glue guns as you mentioned. I'm not good with glue guns, and I'm genuinely in awe of people who can create, you know, I took a sculpture class, literally I took a sculpture class once, and a video sculpture class, and I was so proud of what I made, and then the whole class and the professor laughed. So you know, I was like, okay, my standards are a little um unrealistic here. Okay, so but what your work does is I love the shininess of it. I love the juxtaposition of textures in it. And I love that you use bold colors, textures, shininess to illustrate decay and rot, to illustrate uh, the immorality of colonial capitalist underbellies, and the use of pink and pastels in that. And something, and like very, it actually reminds me so much of like growing up in the 80s and 90s in Jakarta, like, you know, like that sort of we were talking about how what some people would call gaudiness is actually like very like comforting and has real value to other people. So yeah, please, I would love to hear your choice of materialities in your show.
So I used as a quote to like at the top of the exhibition text, or maybe at the bottom, this quote that I really liked, which was, if luxury is what is produced in excess of an object's capacity to be used, then anything can be luxury if you just make it useless. So I thought that that was very relevant to the arowana as a mass-produced endangered species and as like a swimming painting and a living bauble. But then also relevant to, I just tend to use a lot of throwaway tat that I find on the floor or in charity shops rather than having, so I just magpie it and never know what I'm going to kind of use in advance. But there's a lot of kind of plastic stuff reused. And I think with plastic, I find it very interesting because originally it was designed so that animals wouldn't go extinct. You know, it was designed, it was invented so that people wouldn't have to use tortoiseshell anymore and wouldn't have to use ivory anymore. What the hell that word? And wouldn't have to use gutta percha, like the natural rubber anymore. So that it had this like utopian bourgeois function, and that also, you know, people hoped, well, it can replace diamonds, it can replace everything that's rare and inaccessible, silk, feathers, furs, like all the most brilliant rare things. So it's magic, but it's an artifice that aims to be common rather than rare. So it's making rarefied things, I guess, in the show, trophies, certificates, model ships out of, what is now a very kind of common, vulgar material. But I like as well, with kind of mass produced tat, that I find it will just be me accruing stuff on the street. The trophies in the show, one is the base is a broken shisha pipe that I found on my friend's road. The other one has toy railway tracks, fake Victorian fencing, plastic fencing from Pound Shop, a neck massage tool, and like gold paper muffin tins, which is why that one's called the Timu trumpet. And then in like prints and scans, it's a similar bricolage, or just like smashing of stuff that I find.
I love using that word as well.
Yeah, but of just things that contain either like anatomical or conceptual or just like visual allusions to what I'm thinking about, but that I have no idea what's going to end up being used. It's just like an exquisite corpse kind of thing when something actually just like physically somehow fits together. But that also all of those materials and items and motifs can then also become like heraldry or insignia. Like I made a coat of arms based on like the Lord of Southampton's coat of arms, but it has like the sock hooks that are the Arowana's baubles in my show, and like a shuttlecock, because it's that, like we said, it's that like exclusivity of something like heraldry or coat of arms kind of extends to also this idea of like something being bootlegged or counterfeit. Like someone else gets to decide what is authentic, what is tasteful, and something like inauthenticity, bootlegging, or having a designer logo on something that you don't have permission to, like why is that not allowed? Like why can't everyone just have like just put hot crystals on themselves? Like fuck that. Like why are some people allowed? So it was thinking about that kind of system of merit and exclusivity, but also how quickly that changes, how quickly something is deemed to be luxury, and then their next day's fish and chip paper, like a labubu. But also when we were speaking about like colonial tastes in color, I don't know if you read this kind of horrid, snooty essay from Adolf Loos. It's called Ornament and Crime.
I have not.
And he kind of, it's a very famous essay, but he decides that ornamentation means moral decay. It's an indulgence indicative of a lack of discipline and restraint. He writes, the modern person who wears the suit of the day must only have a certain amount of culture at his disposal to recognize the laws that forbid him to wear a velvet suit decorated with lace. So he perceives like overindulgence or something that's overstuffed or sumptuous, ornamentation, as a reflection of cultural immaturity.
Which is so racist and
exactly. So
awful.
The modern individual who prefers simplicity and clarity over color is culturally advanced. It's also like, well, peacocks definitely have excessive ornamentation. Like that tail hinders their function. That's natural.
Have you seen the inside of some pubs? Excessive ornamentation.
So that's probably why I love velvet, and I used a lot of velvet, and I combined it with lace and doilies.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And also, like, I think that we both of our work has been maybe described as dealing with femininity in terms of color palettes, but that is very interesting to me because I think how people frame certain color palettes in terms of femininity also displays how they approach gender and sexuality and their connection to certain aesthetic styles. And obviously femininity is not just something for women. It's for like, Indonesia has like over 700 cultures. We have so many indigenous genders, and there's like so many different configurations of how femininity is interwoven into like everyday life and all kinds of people. Um, yeah, that is, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Very quickly, did you know? I only found this out when I was at the castle the other week documenting. So, on the ceiling, I have this huge pink parachute that's very labial, it's very feminine. And it's an old RAF army parachute from the 60s, but it's pink. It's all these shades of pink. And a visitor came while I was documenting, and they said it's what the army did after a parachute was used. They dyed it pink so that no one else would ever use that parachute again. So
Or so they thought.
or so they thought. But yeah, the idea that like a beautiful pink jellyfish parachute would be
Hmm.
just abhorrent to people. But yeah, that's why you find pink parachutes. There you go. I'm gonna segue into probably we're probably gonna have to call some questions, okay?
Yeah, sure. Let's
Just because so I think we were gonna talk about characterization. And I was fascinated by, maybe just because it's very dramatic, the chapter in like Anna Javanese's life that is described as her ransacking and looting Gauguin's studio, and saw like saw that in the Chicago Institute's book about Gauguin, while visiting Brittany with his mistress, Anna Le Javanese, Gauguin became embroiled with sailors who had molested Anna. He suffered a fractured ankle and was laid up for weeks. Anna, incidentally, repaid his gallantry by ransacking his studio in Paris and vanishing forever.
I know. That's so that is one iteration of that story.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Like,
Yeah.
how do
The
you
reason why
see
I'm
it as
writing,
satisfying retribution and comeuppance? Have you
yeah.
decided to view it as her, like,
So
a
I,
courageous state
yeah,
of revenge?
I try and use the pronouns they, them for
Yep,
Anna because like
we don't
this
know.
have been a trans child as well, but like, um, but one part of why I do this project in this book is to show the fiction's, the lacunae in supposed factual tomes, right? And so that's I'm familiar with that quote that you just read, and it mentioned, okay, the sailors molested Anna. Another account says they called her a witch. Another account says it was just Paul being drunk. Like so there's infinite variations of all these different Anna stories. Yes, definitely potential retribution. Interestingly, there's an old 1950s issue of Life magazine that is entitled Gauguin's Faithless Javanese and is like, oh, poor older man who gave people syphilis. Like, how could this young person you enslaved and painted nude potentially, like just and to me that story really captured me when I was first learning these Anna stories because there's a possibility like this was a person with immense both street smarts and intellectual cunning, because a lot of the stories say that they robbed Gauguin of everything except their art, which is such a rejection of the value of his art. Um, and I found in a physics journal, in an international journal of physics about like the use of lasers in art conservation, there's this kind old professor in California who discovered that, oh, actually, like there's this very famous like um artwork of, I believe, Sarah Bernhardt that is attributed to Alphonse Mucha and is therefore declaring Alphonse Mucha like the father of Art Deco. I believe, again, neurodivergent brain. You can check where you will. Um, but this physics researcher was like, actually, looking at the dates that are actually revealed by using lasers with this artwork is like, actually, it seems like Paul Gauguin would have been the creator of this piece, but how could piece have gotten to Mucha? And so they posit that perhaps, I think the link is this person named Anala Javanese, who might have, maybe that was the only art piece they took, and they took that art piece to Mucha. And so there's the possibility that they were genius enough to recognize this is a seminal piece of artwork that my abuser captor has created, and I'm not going to let him have credit for it. I'm not going to let him have credit for an entire Western art form.
Mm.
And give it to somebody else, you know. And then of course there's stories like, oh, and then became Mucha's mistress, and it's like there's no evidence that this young person was ever romantically or sexually involved with any of these men, you know. Um, but there is so much revenge potential there, especially because if you look at even fairly recent 20th century biopics about Gauguin, it's like, oh, Anna was horrible, you know, like a savage, didn't understand his artwork and therefore left. And I'm like, I'm sure what was paying the bills was artwork of her, you know, like they or them, you know, like they, again, like with pronouns, it's like sometimes I do use her, she, her because they may have wanted that, but it's hard to know because there's multiple infinite Annas, right? And also in terms of time and neurodivergent understandings of time and colonial time and historical fact and speculative nonfiction and fabulous meta creations is that Indonesian and Malay don't have time tenses as
Yeah.
languages. So saya makan, I eat could be I eat, I will eat, I ate. It all depends on context. And therefore, as somebody who is also a scholar of translation and accesses translation, I'm like, every single book that is like, this is an accurate English translation from Indonesian, I'm like, no, it's not. There's at least two different other ways you could write that sentence. There's multiple infinite truths, and that is the beauty of our language. It connects, you know, our ancestors with the present, with um, native futures. Like that is the genius of a language with no time tenses. And therefore, literally every translation is just like, we have to make this one time tense. Why? Why do people do that? You know, I mean, I know why. I do that myself. I'm a translator too, you know, but it's like we fit our whole cosmology into this Western understanding of time that doesn't even make sense for us. And I love playing with people's I explicitly shout that out, that discrepancy in the book, because I'm like, what do you think is the truth about time and how we tell it, you know? Because every time I say I'm translating a sentence from Indonesian into English, I'm lying a little bit, you know, or a
Mm.
lot of it. Because this just doesn't fit the way we think about time in our language at all. And possibility is so much a part of time in our language, and that is obviously a huge part of Anna Infinite as well. Um, yeah. Um, and now I'm gonna also segue into perhaps the final sort of set of questions for you, Josie, before we open it up, Mia, to questions, is again agency, which we've just discussed in the context of Anna, but also your choice to connect the Arowana figure to Old Hollywood and Sunset Boulevard and whatever happened to Baby Jane and sort of the Grande Dame figure image and this concept of hagsploitation, which I would like to ask you if you wouldn't mind explaining that term for people who may not be aware of what hagsploitation is. Um, and why did you choose to do that? And how do you feel like you contribute to that characterization in your artwork?
So hagsploitation isn't a very kind term. It also like, as well as hagsploitation, some people used to call it the psycho-biddy genre, which is even more tasteful than hagsploitation. But hagsploitation was a term for this wave of films including Sunset Boulevard and Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, where it would deliberately cast actresses who were no longer deemed kind of usable in Hollywood as leading roles. And so they could only be cast as hags, as psycho biddies, characterized almost on this meta level as being like deranged by their aging alone and their isolation, and by the loss of their looks and their fame. So in relation to the arowana, I think when I saw an arowana, I was like, that fish looks exactly like Bette Davis in Whatever Happens to Baby Jane. They just have the same face. They have exactly the same face. But I think more so it was imagining, like, thinking about also the like colonial or imperial hubris of like the British in Malaysia and Singapore, of this like during and after independence, this abrupt kind of dethroning, and that they're suddenly defunct. They're no longer, kind of masters of their hill station, and like the having to like grapple with that acceptance of like, yeah, of no longer taking that kind of champion role, how that kind of featured in literature about that period, like Anthony Burgess's series, which is about kind of like different colonial administrators during Malaysian independence, called the Malayan Trilogy, which just shows how like sunburnt and boiled and drunk everyone was, and just, yeah, unable to accept their futility. And thinking about in Sunset Boulevard and Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, it's not their fault that they're kind of living in these mausoleums and they're trapped with an inability to accept the loss of their fame and their heyday. Like, Norma Desmond in Sunset Boulevard is no longer famous because she's been replaced when the talkies come in. But they've been made and chewed by Hollywood star making machine in a way that means they can't survive independently because they've never had to. So they are unable to realize their obsolescence, or like they're not equipped to deal with it as well. This like kind of just quite horrible dissonance, that it's not excessive pride or like delusion, it's that they've been built for this by other systems, which doesn't apply to the British colonial powers, but it applies to Baby Jane, Norma Desmond. They are the victims, I think, Baby Jane and Norma Desmond, not the British colonial hill station owners. But similarly with the Arowanas, so there's been a huge crash in the industry because of like overproduction, and that's lowered prices, and so many of the breeding farms have had to close down. Like on a stretch in Bukit Merah along this lake where there used to be 70 arowana farms along a 3-kilometer stretch, there are only like 3 still operating. And there are all these just kind of these signs that have been taken down that used to be trillion gold arowana, imperial arowana. So there's like a rewilding effort for arowanas to return to the lake, to return to their natural habitat. But that isn't possible with any of the arowanas that have been raised in a tank, in an aquarium. And when I was speaking to one of the breeders, he was like, it's like releasing a princess into a pond. She'd wonder, where's my dinner? Where's my food? There's no human feeding me. And so it's the same thing of just feeling, yeah, like they're left as these kind of lonely swimming paintings, that the star of the breeding pond, and then just are in solitary splendor and are just like a picture in a watery frame. And then the last thing I'll say about that is also that when these breeding farms have to close down, or the aquarium shops, there's like closing down, all stock must go. All these fish that are allegedly worth like £500,000 each, just giving them away for free. And surplus, it's just, they have to just unplug the tanks or fill in the ponds with concrete. So again, plunder mausoleum. plunder mausoleums because they are literally mausoleumed at the end. But yeah, just the kind of sadness of that.
Beautiful.
Arowana and the plugs just unpulled.
Beautifully taking us full circle with that. Thank you, Josie.
Thank you, Oka, for yapping with me, for yapping about.
Anytime.
That was super interesting. Thanks, both of you. Yeah, really great to hear you both in conversation. And I think there's so many overlaps between what you're exploring at the moment in your works. And it's just, yeah, it's really interesting to unpack that. We haven't got any questions in the chat. That's because we were all just like so, yeah, immersed in what you're saying that we haven't had a chance to think of one. I'm going to switch to gallery mode. So that I can see everyone. And if anyone, yeah, on the call would like to ask a question, you can pop it in the chat, or you feel free to kind of raise a hand, and we can kind of go to you. And you're welcome to kind of speak to Oka and Josie in person and ask a question. In the meantime, I think, Josie, I'd like to ask a bit about the soundtrack to your work, because I was kind of aware that, we shared some images of the installation, and we spoke about the materiality of the work and the kind of materials that you're using in your sculptures and in the installation, but there's also an audio piece that comes along with the show, and I think that yeah, it adds a kind of layer to the experience of coming into the space and seeing the exhibition. So yeah, would you mind talking a little bit about it?
Of course. We can put the link to that in the chat. There's a YouTube upload, and it's also on the God's House Tower page. So I, separately to Khairani's commission, to Oka's commission, I had written or been writing a kind of memoir as I went along with the research to kind of try and work out the narrative arc of the rise and fall of my like particular champion, Arowana. And I again had written 12,000 words of notes, and my friend and collaborator Wesley Gonzalez, who I've made some music videos for, and he's one of my emotional support animals in my work. So we work together a lot, and I kind of a week before the show was like, we need to make a soundscape from this 12,000 word memoir, and sent him a 97 song reference playlist and 12,000 words of lyrics. And he had a week, and he made such an incredible soundscape from it. So he worked my memoir into a song form, which was then voiced by two Arowanas, and it was kind of going through the different eras of her life. So her speaking nostalgically about her childhood, and then filled with righteous fury when she was dropped from her studio and sold for a terrible price. But so it collapsed or combined just like all of the different strands of influences and research, like in the same way as the prints and the scans and the sculptures. There's kind of quotes from Bette Davis talking about Joan Crawford that I've kind of reworked. There's excerpts from diaries that were kind of found by Mem Sahib, like kind of British colonial wives in the hill stations. So she was this kind of collision of influences. And then she talks about kind of her relationship with Dr. Eugene, who was one of the real Arowana plastic surgeons I met. And so I was kind of envisioning him in this context as similar to both like the studio head that is in charge of your fate, of whether you're a star and then whether you're dropped. And that kind of relationship of power between, because I clearly remembered like Dr. Eugene, when I met him, saying, if I don't do surgery on this fish, no one will love it because it's not beautiful. If I make it beautiful, then someone will love it. And just being like, it hurts my heart. But So trying to frame it within like rivalries between other kind of champion Arowanas, just wanting to make it kind of very gossipy. And yeah, and Wes made an absolutely deranged 9-minute rock opera.
Deranged and catchy.
It is so
Deranged and
catchy.
so catchy, yeah.
So catchy.
And I can hear like Southeast Asian influences in it for sure.
I sent him 97 songs. So I think whatever made it in was just what must have been like the first three in the reference playlist before he was just like, just leave me alone.
But I think it's a really, important part of the work because it's really nice to hear when you're in the space the voice of the fish herself, and it's something actually that also happens in the building in our heritage exhibition. So on one of the floors in the tower, there's a creative writing piece by Deborah Gearing, who's a local kind of poet and playwright, and she's imagining the tower witnessing the prisoners coming in and out of the building and kind of like seeing what's happening in the space. And I think it's a really powerful way of exploring, stories and thinking about different perspectives. And I know that Oka, you've explored that too in your work. Also, in the piece that we've commissioned to sit alongside the exhibition, the creative writing piece that you wrote from the point of view of the Arowana, that also kind of uses that, uses that form and that technique. Um, and actually, so much so that when I read it, I was like, I feel like I need this to be kind of spoken. And Oka really kindly read it out for us and has kind of dramatized the piece, which is also on our website on the exhibition listing, which you should definitely go and listen to if you haven't already. But I wonder, Oka, whether you could talk a little bit about writing that piece and the kind of process of that and getting to know Josie's work and how that fed into it, and why people should go and read it and listen to it.
Oh, thank you. I mean, first of all, such a thrill. I had no idea I'd be voice acting an aging starlet, Arowana fish when during our first Zoom, and it was truly so much fun. Thank you for doing that. Academy Awards next, who knows? Um, uh, I thought that Josie's concept was crystal clear to me, from the artwork, from the research that had been done, from the remit. I could just like sense exactly the kind of aging fish that Josie had been, in your words, Josie, not mine, but monomaniacally working on for so long. You did such a stellar job of explaining that, and I think whatever I wasn't clear to me, I could ask you about this character, and I kind of sort of imagined there were a couple of like older Indonesian actresses that I also had in my mind, like who have like varying degrees of gravitas and like prestige associated with them. Like Christine Hakim and Titi Puspa. And I uh I think it was very illuminating as well when I was writing the piece, and then I got to talk more with both of you, Mia and Josie, about how actually um these artworks, initially I wrote about it as though, like the fish knows Josie. The fish is like, this exhibition is like artifacts from their house that, that Josie has borrowed for the exhibition and all of this stuff. And then Josie and Mia, you explained that perhaps Josie should be taken out of it and it should be this fully fictional, more fictional space where these artifacts are not artworks that Josie created, but but like souvenirs of a bygone era, like sort of like fan paraphernalia for this aging starlet. For example, I remember I initially wrote about the pajamas. It's like, oh, Josie made these amazing pajamas and I begged her to
Oh,
let
I
me
didn't.
wear them for a little bit, and then I had to give it back to her for the exhibition, and then Josie was like, no, 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 like those are pajamas like especially made, um yeah, like Also, like Deborah Vance from Hacks, I don't know, popped into my head when I was thinking about this. You know, pajamas that were like maybe emblazoned with like um different kinds of, yeah, ornamentation and like different editions in my mind. I was imagining like what would the fandom for this Arowana be like, and like what would their relationship to the fandom be like, and like what would their house look like, which was a wild ride. So yeah, thank you for giving me like such rich material to work from. It was really fun.
Thank you.
Thanks, Oka. I'm gonna, yeah, ask the audience again. I don't think we have any questions on the chat, but would anyone like to ask a question before yeah, before we wrap up? I saw a couple of cameras being switched on, but yeah. Hi, Poppy. Did you have a question? Well, hello. It's nice to see your face anyway. Um,
Poppy's my boss.
oh, hi, Poppy. Hi, Josie's boss. Um, okay. Well, yeah, thank you, Josie and Oka. It's been super fascinating. And I'm excited to go into work tomorrow and have a wander around the exhibition with all of this new kind of, yeah, all these new ideas in my mind. Um, yeah, which I guess is a little plug for everybody else to do the same. We're open for the next couple of weekends, so please, if you can, come down to Southampton, come to God's House Tower and see the work in person. I always, yeah, it's just the nature of the beast, but it's one of those things with exhibitions where it's just there, and then all of a sudden it's not, and it kind of won't ever be back in the same way again. So yeah, it really is a bit of a precious thing.
God, man.
I know, well, it just feels like that every time. I always feel like we install it and then I'm really excited. I'm like, here's the exhibition. And then before you know it, it's the end. And it's kind of like, obviously, the work exists and the documentation's there. And like, we'll all continue to talk about it and think about it. But yeah, it's a special thing, an exhibition and an installation like this where there's like an audio component and, all the visual stuff and all this kind of, all these textiles.
Oh, there's a question.
Oh. Great. Insights can stop rabbiting on. Catherine has got a question for us. Catherine, do you want to ask in person or I can also just read it out? Um, I will read it out unless I'm interrupted. So Catherine's got a question for Josie. Thank you for such a fascinating talk. I'm sorry you've already explained this and if I missed it, but why are Arowana gendered? Why do you refer to individuals as she? Is it because of the similarities between the predicament of women in human society and these fish, or because only female Arowana are bred and mausoleumed and exploited in this way, or some other reasons? It's a really
So
interesting.
that's a very, very valid and good question. So Arowana by sight, it's quite difficult to gender them by sight. And even kind of people who work at the farms and in the ponds like struggle. It's a very subtle difference. But actually, the male Arowanas carry all the babies in their mouth. So they're brooders, and for 2 months they carry kind of all this young in their mouth. So the male Arowana actually have a really shit time because they'll be in the breeding ponds, and every day people are going around and physically catching them and then opening the mouth to see if they're incubating these babies. And then if there are babies, eggs in the mouth of the arowana, those are taken away to be brooded in the aquarium inside. And it also tends to be that the male arowanas are actually more often the champion arowanas, just kind of due to their size and that their kind of facial characteristics are what is more often kind of aligned with the profile and the shape and the size that is kind of looked for in a champion individual. I think my Arowana protagonist, I always thought of as she, partly I think because of feeling that characterization between her and this Grand Dame Gignol, of thinking of a champion made obsolete and kind of living surrounded with the kind of brutality of being kind of used and thrown away. That, and that Arowana looked exactly like Bette Davis didn't probably help with me deciding to gender her as female. And then I think also casting her as her. No, I think it is that. So it's not accurate. The male Arowanas are equally ill-treated and have to do all the brooding. But I think I was just kind of connecting my Arowana with also other figures like in my head, Imelda Marcos, like just these, a lot of the people who I was characterizing her as were a lot of kind of different female figures. But maybe my next show will be a husband, this Arowana's husband, or a male champion Arowana.
That's something to look forward to.
Yeah, why don't you come back, Jace? We'll book you in again next year for
Please, I don't have anywhere to put everything as well, so it would be good if I could just keep it there, to be honest.
Great, thank you. Catherine's put a thank you in the chat as well. Cool. Okay, in that case, if there aren't any more questions, I think we should wrap up. Thank you so much, Oka and Josie. Yeah, as I said, super fascinating. And thanks to everyone for coming. We'll be uploading this onto YouTube. So, yeah, if you know people who couldn't make it tonight or who'd be interested in finding out more, you can access it there. And we've got a couple of events booked in as well, actually. Josie's going to be down in Southampton doing a workshop on the Saturday. So you can come and join her and make some work with her, make some art in the space, kind of responding to the show and to particularly to the trophies and the treasures that are in there. And then on the Sunday, we're going to do an artist-led tour around the space and just say kind of like a final goodbye before the end of the exhibition. So yeah, if you can come and join us for those, that'd be really lovely. And yeah.
Clearance, all fish must go. Otherwise, it's all being thrown off the roof of God's House Tower and then filled with concrete. So yeah, come on the Sunday and see it before it's all mausoleum.
Yeah,
Join us.
Cool. Yeah, thank you, everybody.
Yeah, everyone.
Thank you.